Welcome to Framlingham College In Conversation.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Alicia Drummond. I'm a BACP accredited therapist. I'm the founder of Teen Tips and the Wellbeing Hub for Schools, which is an online platform aimed to provide both young people and those looking after them with access to up-to-date professional advice and practical tools and tips to help them deal with the pressures of growing up. And I am super happy to be invited to join this In Conversation podcast. Today we're going to be chatting to Oliver Lloyd, who's the Deputy Head of Pastoral here at Fram, and also to Will, who's Year 13, is that right, Will?
Yes. Yeah.
And Anna, you Year 12, Is that right? And they're both Wellbeing ambassadors within the school. So it's a really exciting podcast to be making, and I'm very grateful to be invited to be here. So hello everybody, and Ollie, can you just tell us how the whole Wellbeing Ambassadors programme came about here at Framlingham?
Yeah, absolutely. Wellbeing Ambassadors are part of our wider wellbeing and pastoral care strategy, which is sort of underpinned by the philosophy of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Martin Seligman. So Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Perma by Martin Seligman, which then sort of filters down into various strands of social and emotional learning at Framlingham College. So that filters into tutorials where we have flow tutorials, it filters into PSHE learning, filters into the boarding houses, it filters into assemblies, chapels, into our medical centre provision. So it really permeates all areas and creates a culture around positive well-being. The Wellbeing Ambassadors is very much the student-led element of this. And I suppose originally it came out of the peer mentoring scheme, but then I started to do a bit of research around making a more robust provision. And on the Teen Tips Wellbeing Hub website, there's a very good resource in training wellbeing ambassadors. They have resources there for that very purpose.
Can you just tell me a little bit more about what the role's about, what you get involved in, how you feel about being an advocate for college pupils' well-being, what you're seeing, etc.?
Yeah, so it started last year where we decided an initiative of wellbeing ambassadors would be useful having like a pupil-led voice. So beforehand, obviously, there was always a prefect for Pastoral, but apart from that, there was never really like groups where people could actually create ideas. So the Wellbeing Ambassadors was just a sixth form led thing that you applied for. There was an interview stage, so making sure that you had the right people. And then now we're basically just meeting weekly, creating ideas, and being that like source from Mr. Lloyd to the students, and like basically getting it to like up to date with like in like a teenage way in a sense.
Yeah. Okay. And Anna, how do you think your fellow pupils have responded to the scheme?
I feel like many people have responded quite well to our wellbeing roles, especially a lot of the younger pupils, because I feel like when I was younger, I felt quite scared to go up to the sixth formers or the ones that were above me. So I feel a lot of them now, they are comfortable coming up to us and talking to us, and I feel especially by speaking in Year 9 assemblies and stuff, it's really helped well-being and people being able to talk out and, you know, get help and all of that kind of stuff.
It's also aimed, the Wellbeing Ambassador programme has aimed at social cohesion really, and killing off old hierarchies of sixth formers being heavy-handed and we're at the top now and, you know, we're not going to talk to a Year 9. It's aimed at sort of basically overcoming that and making sure that, you know, a Year 9 can openly go to a sixth former or a Year 11 and therefore create this far greater social cohesion, which I think is fit for purpose in the 21st century independent school environment.
I think it's incredible. So do you want to tell us a bit more about what you have been doing?
So for example, Philly and I, one of the other wellbeing ambassadors, the other week, we went into each of the houses and I don't think we've quite got it like up and going on social media, but we went in and like interviewed people about their mental health and about how they cope with it, because we thought quite a good idea, because obviously we have a lot of talks from external speakers about like how you deal with it, but we thought quite a useful idea would be pupils sharing the ideas with each other, because obviously a lot of people are living the same lives and quite a lot of the stresses that they're like going through are very similar. So we went round with a box of sweets to make it a bit less like nerve-wracking, but yeah, just going down and interviewing some of the boys in the houses was really great.
And did you find that there was a difference between the boys and the girls in terms of who was happy to share and talk?
Well, I feel in a girl's house, it's very much, if you know the girls in the younger years, they come up to you. So by a lot of us in sixth form in the year 12 and 13 in Pembroke, so that's what the house I'm in, we very much Pembroke is like a big family, so them asking for help and stuff is very much, it's easy in our house. I don't know if it's like that in other houses, it probably is, but we're very much like a family in Pembroke. So, you know, a lot of the young years nowadays, they feel very comfortable. Well, that's what I get. I think they feel very comfortable in talking to us.
That's great. And did you have the similar experience with the boys?
Last week we actually did, myself and another Wellbeing ambassador, we did a talk to the school about the stigma around men's mental health and people not talking, which we were trying to break. And as showed in those interviews when we spoke to them, there was a slight reluctance. But I feel like the problem is the only reason people aren't talking, which this isn't like a professional opinion, this is just mine, but the reason why people aren't talking is because no one else is. And it's just like this chain reaction. It's not about deep down you're not going to share it. It's just why would I be vulnerable if all my friends aren't? Because then it's you always want to be cool, you always want to be in part of a group. So if hopefully we lead by example and show that it's okay to talk about your feelings no matter what gender you are, then hopefully we can create a chain reaction, and then by the time we've left, the whole the school will be able to just talk openly.
There were two things that you came up with there. One was the word vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think vulnerability, if we can't be vulnerable, we also can't be intimate with people, because there's always a part of us that we're keeping hidden, isn't there? And as long as we keep that part hidden, then we can't be fully with other people. So I suppose there's a brilliant book, actually, somebody called Brené Brown, who's written a book on the power of vulnerability. Definitely worth a read if you get a minute. She's done a podcast. So that was the first thing. And then I suppose the second thing that came up for me, and I don't know where you sit on all of this, is that idea of we want people to be able to talk openly. And I guess it's also only when we do that can we start to also make those differentiations between, what's normal to feel, and then where do we step into where we perhaps might need a bit of extra help. So I guess it's so important that we open those conversations up first so that we can then re-establish a new balance as to what we do need to be talking about. Is that what you kind of come across?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were doing some research before we did the talk, and we found, I can't remember the name, but an American college professor was saying that boys at our age, when they do actually open up and talk, they're more likely to talk to girls about it, because it's all about that vulnerability and about they feel they'll be able to emphasize more.
Yeah. So that empathy piece is really, really helpful. And interestingly, I've been an adolescent therapist since 2009, and very often when you're working in therapy with young people, it can take a longer to get boys to perhaps open up and to feel safe, but then once they have opened up, you're kind of off and running. And I think it's that, I don't know how you feel about what the perception of therapy is as well, because I think that's interesting. What are the blocks to people accessing talking help, do you think?
With therapy, I think there is kind of a stigma around it. I think a lot of people that I know they don't really want to be seen as going to therapy, but I feel like if we change that, if we say that actually therapy is really helpful, it's really good, if we change the stigma around it and and definitely with younger people, because you see older people going to therapy, and it's like, let's change it. That's, if people need help and that's the right thing to do, let's not be scared of it. Let's encourage people to get the help they need, instead of being like, actually no, that looks bad. If people see that I'm going to it, actually it's not bad. It's very helpful, and I think encouragement is the important thing there.
Yeah, when you train to be a therapist, you have to have therapy the whole way through. And at first, you think, oh, God, here we go. What am I going to talk about this week? And then you think, this is marvellous. 50 whole minutes to talk about myself. It's great. So I think there is a lot of breaking down that stigma. And I guess a part of that piece is going to be educating parents sometimes, isn't it? I don't know whether you come across with your peers that there's kind of an influence around their parents' thinking and thoughts and attitudes.
Yeah, especially if some of the problems may be coming from the parents as well. Like, it's quite hard to gauge your parents. Obviously, when you're over 16, I'm pretty sure when you're over 16 you can do it privately. But if there's year 9 or 10 who's got problems at home, it's going to be quite difficult to have a chat, because the first thing that any parent's obviously going to ask is, what's up? What's the problem? Do you want to talk about it? And then that's when you get to the awkward stage. But there was like a quote, I can't remember who it was by. I can't remember who told me, but someone just said about like the whole stigma around therapy. They were like, if you break your leg, you're going to go to hospital and you're going to get it treated. So when you have like a mental health issue, then why aren't you going to see someone professional about it?
Exactly. I absolutely agree. And it's the same things like, if you had glandular fever and you get that exhaustion and you don't have the energy to do something, and actually that's very similar feeling when you have depression. People who are depressed tend to be utterly exhausted. So we have to be realistic about our expectations of them. When you've been talking to your peers and you sort of think maybe one of them would really benefit from talking to a trusted adult, what have you found works well to help them to make that connection?
Well, I feel our houses, especially in my house, because obviously I don't know what it's like in other houses, but if you're really friendly with them, our house mistress, so I am, and I feel a lot the girls are, it's really easy to say things to her, and especially there's been a case where somebody's come up to me and I've been like quite worried, so I've gone and told her, and it's like, it's very easy to, if you feel like you need to tell somebody, to actually tell them. And that's what I think is really good in the girls' house, especially, is that actually you feel okay to tell your house mistress about something somebody else is going through because you're worried about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth just saying there that I think also our wellbeing ambassadors are mental health first aid trained and have some element of safeguarding training as well. So they're part of the matrix really of putting all this in place and communicating, creating that bridge between pupils and adult staff.
Yeah, so student life came in and gave us it was sort of like it was a bit like a talk, but it was like active. So we were engaging in it, where we spent a day looking at different mental health issues and having like a booklet which we'd fill out. It was basically going through scenarios and going through how we deal with it, and then in groups we'd go through like an overview and basically comparing what we said to what's like the appropriate thing to do, and just finding out the barriers. Because one of the main issues to talk about as being a wellbeing ambassador is, where's the line between when you talk to someone, you telling them that everything's going to be okay, and then telling them that you can talk again, but then where's the line where you need to go tell a teacher about it? Because where's like the safeguarding issue? So I think learning about that and learning where the boundaries are was very important, because it helps, I guess, in the long term.
That's one thing that's really good about our role, is that the communication is just better and better, better than it was. And that's what's, I think, is really important at the moment, is that communication between the younger years, between the sixth formers, between the teachers, between all the people who are mentally health trained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job already, because you've already made a kind of cultural shift in terms of people feeling that they can come and talk. And I guess that actively going out and finding them, even if it involves boxes of sweets, which I have to say I take with me everywhere, because it does get people involved, doesn't it? But going out and actually looking like you want to talk to them is really important part of it. So being proactive rather than always being reactive. And I guess there's that kind of piece where you've got somebody who you're worried about. How do you persuade them to go and talk to somebody? And that's why I think in schools we have to be so careful that if we're going to ask young people, like you're doing such a great job, that we give you the skills training and that you understand the safeguarding and that you understand that it's important to look after yourself at the same time, because it takes 5 years to train to be a therapist, so you're not expected to do that in any one go. So it's great that you're getting good training around it. So what would you say were the kind of most prevalent mental health issues that you're coming across? What do you think your peers are struggling most with?
I think anxiety. A lot of that actually comes across from people, that they're stressed about a lot of tests coming up, they've got a lot of work going on, but they're also stressed about how they're viewed from other people. And, especially with girls, girls can be horrible sometimes. So having that anxiety about, what do I look like? Or how are they viewing me? Have I said the wrong thing? I feel a lot of girls especially really struggle with anxiety about how they come across and how actually they're viewed in our society and in school. So yeah, that's a big issue that I see.
I think, with anxiety, everyone has anxiety. It's just about like different levels it's on, I guess. But I think one of the main stresses at our school is obviously, as you get older, I think, is relationships and stuff. And I think especially when you get into one, or if like everyone else is around it, you're like worrying. But I think, I don't know if I'm guessing it's just all genders, but maybe not just boys, but you're just worrying, like, with A levels coming out, with all this stuff, so would you want to do it? And lots of people have like all these like buzzwords that are going around, like commitment issues, trust issues. Like, I feel like sometimes people just want someone to talk to, because obviously the whole point of like wellbeing ambassadors is for helping people, but it's not just about helping people with actual mental health problems. It's about like making sure that you keep people having like a positive mental health and a positive well-being. So by like with all people about stress, by like educating them, because I think me and Miss Lloyd were talking about plans to do a podcast with about like relationships and about like the stress, and then having one on like 4 key like subjects that we thought like broke down the main areas of stress. So I think it was academics, relationships, co-curricular, like sporting excellence, and that can be from parents or yourself. And then I can't remember the last one.
Social media.
Yeah.
Social media. Okay.
Something you're very passionate.
Social media, something I'm very passionate about. Well, yeah.
Is that in a positive way, Mr. Lloyd, or is that in a negative, or are you in a neutral stance on?
That's in a really open-minded, positive way, in that we've actually gone out to our pupil body and created social media focus groups and sort of wider smartphone issues, and trying to explore those. Being a dinosaur myself and having grown up in a world without mobile phones as a teenager, it's a very different landscape that young people are now experiencing from the landscape we experienced. And I think, therefore, for me, it's about understanding the true teenage experience around social media apps and addiction on those apps and the various negative impacts. But I think also trying to put a positive slant on it and saying, actually, what good are they doing? Because they're here to stay. We have to accept that. So, and what I wanted to explore is this tussle between the parental issue of get off that phone, and the kind of, I suppose, conflict that ensues around mobile phones between parents and their teens. I wanted to explore that, and I really just want to explore what young people feel about their phones, and whether they themselves can identify that it may lead to mental health issues. Can they develop healthier ways of using their phones? So we had our first focus group yesterday, and it was brilliant. There are lots of different opinions around this. Some people saying, yeah, absolutely leads to mental health issues. Other people saying it's just not that big a deal, let's just get over it. But we're going to continue to explore that and hopefully get some answers that will then ultimately build into a wider digital strategy around technology and young people. And, if we can teach young people to build apps, that's a fantastic use of modern technology and smartphones. And that's kind of where I'm driving for it. So less focusing on the negatives, but understanding negatives and then trying to push forwards in a positive way.
Well, I can see it from both arguments. Because on the one hand, you've got social media as a constant comparison. Like, you go on and you'll see, well, like, the socially accepted, like, attractiveness of, and like the, oh my God. And like, if you're like in a relationship with someone or by yourself, you're like, am I good enough? I don't look like that person. You go onto like TikTok and you see all these like influencers who have got millions of followers, and you're like, well, I'm never going to look like that, am I? So I think that's always going to cause stress, as well as like cyberbullying, because like with like I don't know how to say it without sounding a bit cringe, but the old-fashioned like playground bully, where you'd go and like they'd steal your lunch or something and like give you like a thump on the arm and then you'd go home. But with like cyberbullying, it's never going away, because you're always on your phone. You've got it for 24 hours a day, and there's no way you can really escape it. So obviously those are the negatives, but I feel like at the same time there's positives to everything. Otherwise it wouldn't really exist, would it? So with like on the mental health side, if you're upset or if you're worried, without like, I thought if I was ever stressed and I was like by myself, I feel like that would sometimes make it worse. Having like social media to be able to talk to your friends and being able to like have a phone call or have a text, which is sometimes less pressurizing, it's quite nice. Send a little text, and like, especially if like someone sees you upset and they send you like an Instagram message later saying, saw you looked a bit down, how are you? I can talk about it if you want. And just creating that like connection through social media.
I think it's really, really important. And I think, if you think about lockdown, we would have all been in the right muddle without being able to do that, wouldn't we? We'd have all been really disconnected. And I suppose there is always going to be that kind of standoff between parents who haven't grown up with it and young people. I mean, it's interesting. There's a thing called the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illnesses. And it lists about 297 different mental illnesses that you can possibly have. And there is not one single one of them that doesn't list poor sleep as either a cause of the mental illness or a symptom of it. So when you said we have our phones 24/7, and I think probably one of the biggest battles that I come across, and you can correct me because you will probably know better, is that one between parents and young people about having your phones overnight. And from a parental perspective, I really get it, because as a teenager you need about 9 hours sleep. But then I'm imagining for some people the anxiety of not having it, or the silence that comes when all of that stuff is switched off, can be anxiety inducing as and of itself. So I don't know, what do you guys think?
So in years 9 to 11, you get your phones taken away at night, and the timings change as you increase.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How many do you think have second phones?
So I was just about to say the stress that I had going into my house trying to fish out like an iPhone 4 or 5. But obviously they're not stupid, unless you're going to like, I don't know, your phone. Like one of the classic ones is you take out the SIM card, or like you drop your phone in the pool, it stops working and you get a new one. But then it looks because it's no cracks, it looks perfectly fine. But like the stress that people go through to like break the rules, it shows how much we rely on like social media and stuff. Like I can't say it's like it doesn't happen, because I can admit
No. You'd be really weird if I came in and you said nobody has a second phone at all.
Yeah.
But what always amazes me is perhaps more problematic in the long term is I don't have a problem with with you guys trying to sneak around the system, because that's kind of what you're supposed to be doing. The problem I have is where parents are implicit, i.e. they're giving people second phones. Because what are you saying? You're going to say, well, actually the rules don't really kind of apply. And then you end up with, people kind of in senior positions in companies and governments who've never learnt that actually the rules do apply to you as well. So I suppose there's, you guys trying to sneak around the system is it's what teenagers do.
It really does show you how much you rely on it when it gets taken away at like 9:45 and you just don't know what to do. You're about to send like the last message to a friend or something.
And it's gone.
Yeah.
We're wise to it. We're wise to it, Will, don't worry. we know.
But I think that's really, really interesting point that you make, that you're quite shocked how it feels, does it feel like having an arm taken away sometimes?
But like, it's kind of like, I don't know, in a sense, it's kind of like revision. But like, for me, like, I don't want to do it, but I know it's going to benefit me, and like, I'll always try and find ways around it, but at the end of the day, you do it, and then you realise later on it's actually helped you.
And there's things about the teenage brain that make it more difficult. I mean, the way the teenage brain is wired is it's kind of, you've got the reward zone, which is much more fizzy than it is at any other time. So they did this really interesting experiment where the psychologists, they posted children and then teenagers and then adults into an fMRI brain scanner, and they fed them exactly the same amounts of sugar. And what they discovered was that the teenage brain got much more activated, the reward zone, much more activated by the sugar than either children or adults. So we know that you're kind of wired for a bit of novelty, a bit of excitement. And if you put something like gaming or social media next to maths revision, surprise, surprise, maths revision doesn't really fulfill any of those needs for excitement and novelty. So it's learning that we have to learn self-regulation, which is what you're talking about. I don't want to do it, but I kind of know that I've got to do it. So it sounds like you've got a pretty good grip on the situation. But I also imagine that you must have some peers and friends who use the online world as a way of avoiding having to communicate in real time with real people. And I don't know where you feel that sits with people's mental health.
I feel there is a lot of people nowadays using online and social media as like an escape from reality. And I feel like we've always learned about, online safety and don't talk to strangers online. But there are like people, I know some of my friends, they've made friends over TikTok, and they've met up and stuff, and they've been our same age. It's been safe and it's been all fine. And, they've made these friends online, and it's been easier to talk to them online because you don't feel you have that stress of getting the right words out. So I feel like a lot of kids nowadays, they feel like it's easier to text, or they feel like it's easier just to like write it down and just send it across because they can't see the other person's reaction. So I feel like a lot of that happens. I feel, for me, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing sometimes, because then you don't learn how to actually express your emotions to another person who is physically with you. And I feel that is very important, because then actually they can help you there and then and actually give you a hug or something. But if you're not used to that, then I think that's probably very hard to then learn as you get older. And as we were talking about earlier, to be vulnerable with somebody. Like, you can't necessarily be vulnerable over text because you can't see people's reactions. And that's a problem that I think is coming in our generation, is that people aren't necessarily being able to be intimate and vulnerable because all they do is text it or communicate over Snapchat or Instagram and stuff. But then when they actually think, oh, I need to talk to this person in real life, it's like, oh no, I'm really stressed about that now, because they don't have that vulnerability that they did over text with them.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And actually, when we think about mental health and well-being, one of the greatest protectors is your relationships. So if all of your relationships are remote, even down to touch, when we touch somebody else, like you said, a hug, you get a quick shot of oxytocin, which is your one of your happy hormones. So it is really important. And if you look at the job markets of the future, actually there are the 4 things that they all think you're going to need more than anything else is good social skills, and that's in person, creativity of thought, initiative, and critical thinking. And also those 4 things really help with the online world, because if you can't do the critical thinking, you're not going to be looking at that social media feed, like you said, Will, and thinking, I'm never going to look like that. Yeah. But actually that's okay, because I'm okay as me, and probably what I'm looking at isn't a fair depiction of what they actually look like. It's probably been doctored and airbrushed and all the rest of it. If you don't have the critical thinking skills, you might not be looking at those kind of influencers who are talking about their latest fad diet, which no dietitian would be allowed to go anywhere near social media and put out as content. So you're not looking at the content and kind of pulling apart what's real. So I think those 4 skills, but perhaps the social skills most importantly, that's the foundation of all good relationships, isn't it? So what advice would you give your peers around online versus offline communication and social skills?
I feel just try to be confident to talk to somebody. Like, if you want to talk over text, that's fine. But actually, in the long run, you need to be able to talk in person. You need to be able to have that communication and that relationship in person, because at the end of the day, if it's just over text, you don't actually have that relationship, really.
What about you, Will? What are your thoughts?
No, yeah, I agree. I think one of the main things to realise is that as much as you can text, like, one of your really good mates, when, like, there's no way you can give, like, as you said, like, I know what sign, oxytocin. Yeah, it's like, there's no way you can, like, physically be with someone over text. And, like, whilst you're, I don't know, chatting to them, or whilst you're communicating over text, there's no real, like, as you said, like, connection. And obviously you're understanding each other's, like, thoughts, but you can, like, type something and delete it. It's not really, like, realistic in a way. And when you get older, I think you realise it more. But that's not really how life is. You can't just, like, say, like, think for a minute, maybe delete it, or, like, they don't reply in 10 minutes and you're like, oh no, I'm going to stress it, like, because that's quite I think a key thing. Like, someone sends a message, like, at night, and, like, as you said, I don't know, maybe their parents have taken away their phone, and, like, an hour later you're like, oh, that sounds a bit stupid now that I said that in the moment. But I think one of the important things just to make sure people know is don't rely on it. Make sure you have those social skills, and make sure you're open and confident in person, because that's how relationships really do, like, what's the word, flourish.
No, totally. And I mean, it's amazing. I think I always remember somebody saying you make more friends being interested in other people than you will waiting for them to be interested in you. So if you're worried about your social skills, kind of coming up with a list, which sounds a bit bonkers, but I've done it with lots of young people, come up with a list of 20 or 30 conversation starters that don't allow them to answer in a one-word answer, kind of, what's your favourite pizza, or rather than do you like pizza, that kind of idea. But social skills are so much more than that, aren't they? Because there's being able to empathise, which is much more difficult if you're not actually with somebody. You can't see their reaction, so it's more difficult. And I think if we're good at empathy, we have better relationships because we treat people properly. The critical thinking skills, it's so easy to go off in I said the wrong thing and they haven't replied, therefore I must be the worst person in the world and I'm stupid and da-da-da-da. Whereas actually, they haven't got their phone with them. Yes, we don't get it right every time, but that's okay. So the social skills, I think, probably are really, really crucial for the relationships. I'm really, really impressed by all the efforts that you're making from a staff perspective, but also from the pupil perspective, to support one another. And I think that conversation that we started about, actually we want to protect and work upstream to prevent mental health crashes rather than waiting for them to happen, is massively important. So congratulations on everything you're doing. Thank you so much for having me, inviting me to be part of this podcast with you. And I just really look forward to hearing more. Maybe we'll do an update in a year's time on what's happening at Framlingham College Pastoral Care.